This episode, we'll talk about setting up the test infrastructure for unit tests in the test pyramid. So it'll allow you to test small functions for testing things such as Redux functions, peer functions, or other functions that have business logic in them. So let's go ahead and start and create a new project from scratch. First, I want to create a new folder. We're going to do this step by step so you understand how things work. So we're going to create a new folder. And let's open this folder up with WebStorm. Okay, right now we don't have a Git repository locally, so let's create one. So Git status, good. We have a repository, we can work with it. The reason I did it locally is because I have a nice little library called Hub we can use here that I found. You may know of it, you may not, but it's pretty cool. So what we can actually do is so that created a repository remotely for us on my TDD TV GitHub. So if we go back here, we have now a new repository that we created locally from the command line. Now lives on my GitHub. So now that we have this, let's do a git status again. Notice it wants to add the idea folder. This is a folder WebStorm creates to create a project for us. It contains metadata, and it holds stuff like version control mappings. Say you wanted to use the visual GUI for, say, Git inside WebStorm. It holds stuff for that. It holds stuff like run and debug configurations, per-user details such as currently open files, stuff like that. Now you could share that with the team if your team wanted to share the same configuration, but I don't really care about that. So right now I want to ignore it. Let's add a git ignore to tell it to ignore this idea folder. Save it. Let's do git status, make sure it's not picking up the idea folder. It no longer is. Let's commit. Let's git add all. Git commit message is going to be ignore idea folder. See if we can push this up now. Git push. Let's try this again. Let's try this. Okay, nice. Let's go back up, make sure this is up here. Let's refresh, it should be there. Great. Now let's create a package.json file so we can actually start setting up our test infrastructure and whatever npm modules we'll need for that. So we're going to do yarn init yes. So what this does is it'll create a package.json, but it won't prompt us to go through each property in that package.json to ask what we want for that property. It will just give us some nice default values that will work nicely for us here. So if we just say yes, it'll create that package.json for us with just the minimal that we really need. So it's got the repository, it's got everything we need here. And so let's push this up too. So at this point, we have a project in WebStorm. We have package.json and whatnot that we need to actually start working on the project. So let's go ahead and create some folders, some folder structure here for our tests. So we're going to use the parent flag so we can create multiple directories at the same time. So we're going to do src test unit because we only have unit tests at this point. We're also going to cd to that. And finally, let's create a new spec for under the unit test folder. Now let's go ahead and create just one test and see if we can get it working. I'm just going to keep this as is so we can make sure we can actually run a test first. Notice that I've got some code snippets I used. I used some code snippets. They're called live templates in WebStorm. If you do command comma and go to the properties in WebStorm, search for live templates. You'll notice that I've created a couple in here for testing. So I've got a description here. It adds this little snippet here. This puts tab spots for you. So if you hit tab, you go to the next thing here. It's really nice. I've also created a couple tests, code snippets, one for Jest, one for Mocha. You can see the difference is that it's using different assertion libraries. This one's using the Jest library. This is using Chai. This allows me to go faster when I write my tests and keeps me consistent with my code. Right now I can't run anything because WebStorm cannot find a framework to run tests. So if we introduce one, then it should pick it up and allow us to try to run those tests. So let's do that. Let's add Mocha first. So the -d is to make sure it adds to the dev dependencies, not the regular dependencies. Okay, if we go back up here, notice it says, hey, I see there's a test framework. Let's allow you to try to run that. So if you click this and run it, it's running, but it does not know what this assertion library is because it just says, hey, what's expect? I don't know how to resolve this. Well, that's Chai, but it doesn't know it's Chai yet. Let's wire up Chai to this. Yarn add Chai. So we go to package.json, make sure they're there. Yep, they're there. Let's see if we can run our test again. Still does not understand what it is because we still need to tell it where to find the Chai expect package. So if we add this flag to Mocha to tell it how to resolve the expect syntax. So let's see if we can run it now. And we can. We can run a test from the test runner in WebStorm, the GUI, but let's make sure we can actually run it from the command line if we choose to do so as well. So if we go to package.json status script, we'll add that same flag that we just added here into our script. We also need to tell it where, so in here, it knows where the tests lie because in the WebStorm test config, we've told it where to look for the tests. But when you create a script, you have to tell it in the script where those tests lie. So they're under src test unit in this case. So we've told it where to run the tests, we've told it how to run it with Chai, and now this should work. So if we do yarn test unit, it should run fine, hopefully. And it does. So we can run tests two different ways, one from the WebStorm GUI test runner and one from the command line. So our test really doesn't have any behavior in it. If you go back here, it just has an expect. We're not really testing anything. So let's try to test something. Let's test drive a new component. I'm just going to give it a dumb name for now just to demonstrate a few things for you. So let's go ahead and run our test, see it fail. It's going to say it doesn't know what this is. Let's go ahead and create it. Before we do that, let's make the test more realistic too. So let's say my component, we expect my component.name to equal Dave. Let's run our test again, see it fail. All right, now we're going to define this. Honestly, if we're doing tester development, to get past the first error, which is a compile error, this should get us past that first error. So let's see if it does. Baby steps, right? Well, we have not imported it yet, so let's import it. Now if we run our tests. Now, this has forced us into a situation where Mocha does not know how to transpile some of the ES6 syntax. We've introduced the import statement, and Mocha and WebStorm are like, what is that? There are some things built into Node, such as, for ES6, Node can recognize stuff like anonymous functions already, but Node cannot recognize things like import statements from ES6. So we have to tell it how to transpile that, and now we have to introduce Babel to be able to do so. So let's do that first. Let's make sure we can actually work with this bare component in our test and get past this first compilation error and get this import to actually work. So what we need right now is a Babel config that our test can use. Let's go ahead and add that. So we could have a Babel RC or a Babel config. Mocha will work with either or. Right now I'll just do a Babel RC to start with. And in the Babel RC, let's put the bare minimum that we'll need to get this import to transpile. And really all we need is this one preset environment, which gives us most of what we'll need for ES6 syntax. Before we can use this, we need to install Babel. So let's do that now. We'll need the CLI, that preset we just saw, and finally Babel register, which we'll use to wire up and make our tests aware of how to transpile and use the Babel RC file. All right, let's check our package.json to make sure we have everything there. We don't. Let's try this again. Okay, now that we have this in place, we have our Babel RC, we have our npm packages we need. So let's tell our tests about the Babel RC. The way we do this with Mocha is we'll tell our test to use the Babel register, and that's a hook that'll bind itself to the node require and automatically compile your files on the fly. So it means that any files with JS, or say JSX for like React, any of that stuff will be transpiled on the fly through Babel register. It'll pick up your Babel RC, use whatever presets or plugins that you have defined in there as part of how to transpile, and transpile it on the fly for you. So when we run these tests, it's going to use Babel register to transpile your tests on the fly. It'll take any ES6 it doesn't know about, look at your Babel RC to figure out if there's any plugins that you can run to transpile it on the fly. And that's how you wire up your test to Babel. So if we do this, it should now run okay. Let's run our test again and see if it works. We've got an error. You can't find Babel core. I don't think did we install that? Oh, we missed that. So let's install that. All right, let's run our test again. It should work this time. And it does. We now have a legit assertion error that we can now make this test pass with. So if we go to my component, put a new property called name in it, make it Dave, this should now pass. Excellent. So we've wired our tests up to use Babel as a transpiler for ES6. We can now do some real tests now with imports and whatnot. What's also nice about Mocha is you can use different assertion libraries. You don't have to use Chai. You can use other ones. So the fact that we're putting in here Chai is because Mocha is flexible. It can use different libraries. We're telling it which library to use for the assertion syntax. So that's why we have to add this in here for it. Let's also try to use a Babel config instead of a Babel RC. So we're going to rename this here. Shift F6. Rename this to, I don't know, old so that it ignores it. Let's go ahead and add a just what we put in our Babel RC. It's just a different format because Babel config is a JSON object, whereas your Babel RC is a JSON object. So you see the difference here? There's props are strings with JSON objects. We've got rid of our Babel RC. It should pick up this Babel config. Let's see if it works. So run our tests again. And I can prove that this works because if I rename this, it should fail. So we've set up Babel, we've shown that we can run it with Babel RC or Babel config with Mocha, and this gets us the basics set up for unit tests. So we've run our tests with the WebStorm test runner here. Let's rename what this actual configuration is actually running here. It gives us a default name when we run it, but I want to change this to run all my unit tests, so let's just do this. All unit tests. And let's change this to be all the tests in a specific directory, which is our unit test directory. So we actually want to run all the tests in our unit test folder, including subdirectories. So when I'm working, now I can just change between different sets of tests. So if I run this, it runs my tests. All right. Also be aware in the WebStorm test runner, make sure that these are enabled to show past tests. Because if you don't, you'll end up with this. You'll be like, what the hell? What's going on with my tests? They're not running. They actually are. You just need to make sure you see them. So also make sure you enable the show ignored so that you can actually see the tests that were ignored. I'll show you how to do that in a minute, how to actually ignore a test. Notice that WebStorm also tells me it does not understand what describing it is. Even though I can control click on it and it takes me there, it still complains about it. So the way we can get rid of this problem is we can go to command comma, get to the preferences, go to languages and frameworks, JavaScript, libraries, and we're going to add the definitely type library for Mocha, and there's also Babel, I'll just do that, and there's also Chai. So once we give it the definitely typed library, the typing will improve. So now it understands completely what this is. We can skip a test by just putting .skip after it. So if I run this, because I have this enabled here, it's going to show my skip tests. If I take this off, it's not going to show my skip tests. We can also do an only on this to only run this test. So if I had a couple tests in here, it's only going to run the first one. So put a 1, put a 2. Let's run our test. It should only run the first one. And again, if this is not on, it's not going to show it, so make sure that's on. You can always run tests in WebStorm via the test runner by doing a Control-R. A lot of people go up here and they'll click on this many times to rerun it, or they'll go up here and click it. But honestly, the best way is to do Control-R. Instantly run your tests from the keyboard. The last thing we'll do is we'll tell our tests to automatically rerun whenever we change production code. So we're going to add a W flag here, as well as our script. So if we save this, now if we go back and run our tests, again, now if we change this, it should rerun our tests, and it does. Likewise, if we run this test from the command line, so if we change our code, back to Dave, it should pass our tests. There it goes. That ends this screencast. I hope you learned a lot.